Hello and welcome to yet another delightful episode of Morbidity and Mortality Podcast. I have a great guest with me today, a policy researcher, teacher, and student advisor, an editor at multiple academic institutions and research centers, a man who got his doctorate degree in law from Osgood Hall Law School, York University, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, a master's degree, and he's got his master's degree in law from Central European University, Budapest, Hungary, and his double LB honors from Abia State University in Nigeria. Dr. Basil Ugochukwu currently teaches international law at Conestoga College Institute of Technology and Advanced Learning, Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. For full disclosure, Dr. Ugochukwu and I are from the same community in Nigeria called Usi. We both graduated from the prestigious Abia State University, a university that has produced so many distinguished public servants, including the current Minister of State Education, Honorable Dr. Chukwuemeka Nwajigba. Dr. Basil Ugochukwu, you are most welcome to my podcast.
Thanks, Dr. Uzo, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thanks again for coming to our show. So, Dr. Ugochukwu, what I want to do is just to tap into your expertise, with regards to COVID-19 and its legal ramifications or implications. And no doubt, COVID-19 pandemic has created challenges on so many fronts, both for individual Canadians and businesses. It has impacted access to justice and effective functioning of Canadian justice and court systems. And in these exceptional times, many Canadians, businesses, and other organizations may be unable to meet numerous time limits currently set out in their federal legislation, including rules for court civil cases and some key regulatory matters. So, please, can you talk to us about the time limits and other acts?
Okay, thanks so much. The place to start will be to first look at the COVID-19 pandemic from its general perspective. And the different ways that it has impacted legal professionals, judges, and those who work and use the courts. So it has personal impacts, it has professional impacts, then it also has impacts related to the rights of people when they are engaging with the administration of justice system. At a personal level, the first thing to note is that lawyers, judges, others who work in the courts, litigants, they're human beings first and foremost. They have families, some of them are married and they have kids, kids that are in school. And so at that personal level, the COVID-19 situation has disrupted everyday activities of these people at the personal individual level. Then at the professional level, it has impacted their ability to function effectively within the professional setting as judges, as lawyers, as administrative people, because there is a lot of disruption. First, there was shock, and then there was confusion, and then there was scramble to see what could be done given the circumstances. And so these are the three areas that it has had impact on professionals working in the legal area. Then coming to your question about limitations with regard to time limits and all of that. So there are two things to note, that there are limitations related to when someone can commence a court action. So if, for example, I have a contract with you and I allege that you have breached the contract, there is a time period within which I should file an action once I become aware of that contract breach. So this is limitation of action. This is the limitation that's related to when an action can be commenced. And limitation of action is often determined by the nature of the action. So limitation relating to contracts might be different from limitation relating to, say, personal injury or a landlord and tenancy situation. In Ontario, what I will do is to use Ontario where I live and how they have engaged with this situation to see if we can extrapolate to other places, because the response has been pretty much the same almost everywhere. So in Ontario, I didn't describe a second limitation. The second limitation is when actions have already started. Within the action itself, when it's in court, there are time frames within which parties are required to perform certain actions, deliver documents, for example, conduct discovery if that is necessary, and do other things. So in Ontario, starting from March, there was an order that was made by the government of Ontario relating to these two different ways that limitations work in the administration of justice setting. So both limitation in relation to when actions can start and limitation within litigation that's already started, they were suspended starting from March. And they were suspended for the period that the COVID emergency, which is what they called it, was going to be in place. So, and that wise, you could say that there was an intervention that was intended to meet that emergency. So if I had, say, 2 years within which to file a personal injury claim, and it happened to be within this period, these 2 years will be suspended. And after the emergency is lifted, whatever number of months that the emergency lasted will be added to the original 2 years that I should have. So this is how it works. What I need to say about the second limitation period, which is limitation within actions that are already in court, is that it imposed limitations by statute, regulation, by law, that established the time limit within which certain actions needed to be performed. But then for this second one, there's a little bit of discretion. The court handling such cases could decide at their discretion on how to manage this and see when real time sensitive actions need to be performed and then ask that they be performed. So this is the two ways that the limitation period has worked. Generally, irrespective of the nature of the action, contract, personal injury, tenant relationship, divorce, or family proceedings, Section 4 of the Limitation Act in Canada makes an average provision of 2 years for limitation within which an action can be filed. And if that window is not utilized, it means that the action cannot be commenced any longer. And if it is commenced, then it will be, in lawyers' language, the statute barred. So
that's very good to know. So if I may follow up, and if I understand what you just said, in regards to the second limit. So
yeah.
does that mean that the court has authority to either to extend or not to extend when action should be taken or not?
So the court will have to determine the urgency of the action that is required and the impact that the action will have on the administration of justice system itself. Now, let us not forget that the courts are set up to do justice and to be fair in doing so. And fairness is determined by a number of factors. Factors relating, for example, to fair hearing, the timeliness of hearings, the openness and transparency of hearings. So if there is any action required that will interfere with the fairness and the administration of justice, that is, should be a characteristic of the entire process, then the courts will respond as needed to ensure that that level of fairness that originally ought to be there is there as well. Now, one important factor is time. So justice shouldn't just be done. You know of the saying that justice delayed is justice denied. So justice has to be done in a very, very timely way. And when you are dealing with a pandemic like this one, there is tendency for there to be delays here and there. So the courts are trying always to adjust to situations to ensure that at least, regardless of the pandemic, that element of justice being done in a timely way is still maintained.
Right.
Yeah.
And given the timely fashion that courts take action, or look in or consider when action is to be taken or not to be taken, what are the legal ramifications or implications of COVID-19 on commercial real estate in Canada or even anywhere else in the world?
Okay, so I can't say that I'll be discussing this from an expertise point of view because I'm not a real estate, but I will just answer based on what I have seen happen and what I picked up from friends who are involved in real estate. So, of course, it has had a huge and damaging impact on real estate, especially in North America, US and Canada, where tenancies are on a month-by-month basis. If we take Nigeria, for example, if someone has paid for 2 years or 3 years rent in advance, the person is in a better situation than someone who pays on a monthly basis. And often the person who pays on a monthly basis depends on his or her employment to be able to make these payments. And the pandemic has led to job losses on a wide and very dangerous scale. So people are struggling to meet up with rent payments and all of that. In Ontario, for example, as well, they try to find an answer to situations like that, especially with regards to individual residential accommodation. So they had an order that suspended evictions for individuals from their homes. But this dispensation covered only homes, residential accommodation. It did not apply to commercial real estate or to companies who are tenants. And so it creates a binary between private residential and commercial. So while evictions are forbidden for private residential, they could be done for commercial real estate. But in Canada as well, there has been, the government has supported businesses through relief for the COVID situation. So there are a number of financial incentives that the government has put in place for businesses and individuals who have been impacted. And it has worked in a very, very organized, effective, efficient fashion. And it continues even as we speak today, unlike in the US where it's a little bit controversial. So of course, at the level of estates, real estate, it has had the COVID-19, probably the largest impact would be in that area because people were evicted. I watched some clips from Texas and the US where people were being let up because they couldn't meet up with rental payment. And you can't say it's these people's, even what the government is paying sometimes is insufficient to meet even the rent payments, let alone food that people have to eat. So it has had a really, really bruising impact on that sector. Yeah.
I agree with you. Its impact has been really bruising on individuals and also corporate bodies. Despite the fact that corporate bodies receive government loan, most of them were mismanaged, misappropriated. And that Texas video that we watched, that was in Houston, Texas. I watched
Yeah.
it, and it was heartbreaking.
It was heartbreaking, It was difficult because these people didn't bring this upon themselves, but that's how the law works. It was very, 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 very emotional for watching some of those.
Yeah. Talking about the U.S., Latino, indigenous, immigrant communities, they are disproportionately affected by this pandemic, in large part because of the persistent legacy of structural racism.
Yeah.
Say from Bronx to Queens in New York, and from Mission District in San Francisco to Navajo nations and black communities of New Orleans, Detroit, Oakland in California. This pandemic highlights our societal failures at the intersections of public health, healthcare, and social justice. So, is COVID-19 a social justice issue at this point? If yes, why?
It goes without saying because the foundation you laid just speaks for itself, that it's a big social justice issue. If we go back a little bit to the administration of justice that we were talking about, and the entire pillars of fairness and openness upon which the entire system itself runs, the COVID-19 situation has disrupted it. So some of the rights that people took for granted, they cannot because of the emergency situation. Even though this is not emergency in the sense of war, but at least its impact is no less as significant. Then if we move to real social justice issues, the pandemic has really, really exacerbated and brought them up in the open. Who are being most affected by the COVID-19 situation, and what healthcare facilities are available to them? One of the things you will note, for example, is that low-income people are also the ones that are most likely to be impacted at a very high scale by this, because they're the ones that are quick to be sent out from their jobs. They are the ones who don't have health care or health insurance. We're very lucky in Canada. We can't say for that for somewhere else. And then you mentioned racialized communities, minority populations, women especially, because most of the job losses that occurred were mostly in retail and service, hotels. Then in the health sector, where because of need, jobs weren't lost, the COVID-19 situation has brought unbearable weight on women who work mostly in the health sector. So they have to work most of the time more than they really would want to without taking any rest at all. You see them every day crying, and societies, some places have not helped. They have not taken the necessary actions required to at least protect public health. They talk about rights, don't trade on me, and all of that, without looking at the overall burden that the actions that they take are having on the rest of society, especially those who are in the front line of providing services in the health sector. So women represent a majority of the frontline service that you're talking about. And if I look at some statistics that I have before me, between March and April in Canada, women lost their own jobs relative to men at twice the rate. So women are more likely to be relieved of their job than men are. In the US itself, more women, there is actually a record here, 11.5 million than men, 9 million, lost their jobs from February to May, with the most significant losses happening among Hispanic and Asian women from the report I read. Now, if you add the fact that some of these women also have kids who could be school-age kids, they are being homeschooled, they have to do Zoom classes like this, and someone has to be there to help. Where do they find the time and the strength to do all of this? It causes a lot of depression. It has to be said. And we're talking mostly in terms of the developed world where things are better run. Imagine what it is like in places like Nigeria, where they have been lucky because the pandemic hasn't been as severe as it has been here. So it is fundamentally a health problem. In the US, for example, the COVID situation has become a pre-existing condition. And if people didn't have insurance coverage for under the Affordable Care Act, what will they do in such situations? And of course, when people lose their jobs, most of the time they lose their insurance. Yeah, their health insurance. So it is at a high level a serious social justice issue because it has brought to the surface most of the inequities and inequalities that have been bubbling under the surface among various societies.
Dr. Ugochukwu, you brought up some salient points. One has to do with women, how this virus has, the pandemic has affected women in the US and elsewhere.
If I may add, there's something I should mention, which is when we talk about remote learning, people have to have access to internet, right? And they have to have computers to be able to engage in remote learning. And I've seen even in some cities in the developed world that there are families that struggle to have computers or have them in sufficient numbers to be able to do remote learning. Where they have computers, they may not have the internet access to be able to do it. All of these are social justice issues, and they escalate the impact of the pandemic at very high levels. We can go on and talk about even other areas as well.
That's another important issue you brought up. Here in the US, even within the cities, there are people who have kids in school, and the school system give their kids laptops to go.
Yeah.
But they can't. Most of them don't have internet connection at home.
Yeah.
One, they probably did because they couldn't afford it, or they didn't consider it a necessity or something important. But
Yeah.
it is now crucial. It is now important. So if you are gonna give the kids laptop, are you gonna give them money to
Or for internet.
for internet? So,
Yes. Yeah.
there are so many issues you brought up here, and let me say right now that my next two my the guest I'm going to have in about 2 weeks' time or a week time will be talking about how COVID-19 has affected women in the U.S. How this pandemic has affected U.S. The women in the U.S. So thank you for bringing up that point. And also the point that we live in a divide, a global divide, where we have the rich countries and the poor countries. So
Yeah.
we here we are talking about internet connections and laptops. What about where the government of those countries are not giving the women or even the families laptops?
Yeah, so we're talking about school age
Right,
children in North America
right,
that they don't have sufficient laptops and internet access. In the developed countries, just picture Nigeria, even the universities. I have relations who work in the universities, who teach in the universities. They can't do anything because the infrastructure is not there. Not just that the computers are not available, there is no internet access, even the technical ability. Because when you get the internet and you get the computer, you have to be able to know how to use them, right? And most people have not seen a computer, they have not used one before. And you are telling them now to do the kind of stuff we are doing here, where just touching a single button can make everything completely go berserk. So it's a
and at this juncture, I will give a shout out to the National Open University of Nigeria in Abuja. They they are designing a system where they are teaching professors, lecturers on how to use internet and Zoom and all that, Google Meet to teach their students. So I have to give them that shout out.
in their own case. What else would they do? They are an open university. So an open university is a university where people don't meet physically, right? So they don't have any option. Yeah.
All right, moving on. Let's talk a little bit about global relationship. How is this pandemic affecting Canada's relationship with the rest of the world? Because for me, I know that in global politics, nations protect their interests. So, what interests are Canadians protecting right now as we speak?
Okay, so the first interest that Canadians are protecting at the moment is to have access to the vaccine whenever it's available. And of course, you know that the countries that manufacture the vaccine, of course, will prioritize their own citizens. Canada it does not have any vaccine in the pipeline, so it has to depend on vaccines that are developed somewhere else. So they have to do a little bit of diplomacy to be able to access the vaccine for their citizens. But from the very beginning of the pandemic, there's this tension. There has always been tension between since the Donald Trump administration in the U.S. and Canada. And Canada and U.S. have always been interdependent allies in the area of commerce and, so at the initial outbreak of the pandemic, when states were looking for protective equipment for healthcare workers and for society, it was a big problem because Donald Trump concentrated on the U.S. So hijacking even, the U.S. government was hijacking protective equipment that were destined for other countries, including Canada. So that's one of the areas where there was a little bit of disagreement and all that. The other area is in the area of trade, which is the area that one of the things I teach students at the college, international trade. And the pandemic really, really disrupted a lot of things. It disrupted travel, it disrupted shipping, because 95% of goods that are shipped internationally are transported by ship. And that disruption created a big problem for businesses. And the contracts that they had in place for supplies disrupted the supply chains that they usually used. But things are better a little bit, but I think they figured out a couple of areas where they could do this in a safe way, in a way that didn't compromise people's health, and made it easier for goods to move around. So these are the few areas where I'm familiar with what Canada has done. But you have to say that the same approach that Canada has adopted is pretty much, because we live in a global ecosystem where there is a lot of interdependence. And if this pandemic has taught the world anything at all, it is that isolation does not help at all. And that to solve problems like this one, a lot of solidarity, cooperation, collaboration is required, because the virus doesn't respect borders. And one of the biggest challenges in solving the pandemic is that some people have claimed rights around it. They could travel wherever they want to. And if you are facing that kind of situation and at the same time trying to solve a pandemic, it makes the work a lot harder than it should have been. Because some people might be doing what they're supposed to do, but if others are not doing what they're supposed to do, then you can't get a handle on the pandemic. All you need is for one person to move from where things are not being done properly to someplace where they are trying to help themselves. And that's basically where we are. So in matters like this, there needs to be a little bit of understanding, a little bit of compromise and cooperation, because obviously no country can deal with a situation like this on their own. It's impossible.
It's highly impossible. This pandemic taught us that global isolationism is not win-win game.
Yeah.
I hope countries could learn from the experiences they are passing through right now, and probably begin to build a better future for if history is going to teach us anything.
Yeah.
So with all the protests going on around the globe, in Nigeria there was NSAS, in America there were a lot of protests, and political campaigning going on. So when do people cross the lines of freedom of movement and association and right to life with respect to protecting other people's life during this pandemic?
One thing to note is that all human rights are interdependent. They relate to one another. The right to health and the right to life are related. In a pandemic situation, the freedom to move around could compromise the health of other people. So there are no rights that are granted in absolute terms, except for the freedom to be free from torture and the freedom to be free from slavery, servitude. Those are the only absolute rights anywhere in the world. The right to life is not absolute, because there are some countries that still have the death penalty, including the US and Nigeria and so many other countries. So most rights are qualified, and they are qualified to protect public safety, public health, public morality, which means that where your right ends is where the rights of some other persons begin, which means that whatever it is that we are doing, we are accountable for how enjoying our rights could lead to someone else losing theirs, which is what some libertarians and people who believe in, who claim to believe in liberty, they don't subscribe to. The catch there is that government can place restrictions. So, okay, the understanding that rights are qualified is that government can place restrictions on rights if those restrictions are intended to protect safety, health, morality, and all of that. But government has to justify those restrictions. In some jurisdictions, the threshold that the government has to meet in justifying the restriction is high, depending on the nature of the right itself. And some require lower threshold of justification. So the thing is, in a pandemic situation, what exactly is the correct threshold for government to justify restriction? Of course, a couple of days ago, the US Supreme Court gave a ruling that basically said that the governor of New York was wrong in imposing restrictions on places of worship. So those are some of, and of course, churches and places of worship where many people gather at once are super spreader events, to use the language of this pandemic. Yeah, so a different jurisdiction might see it differently. I am pretty sure if a case like that comes before the Canadian Supreme Court, they will look at it very, very differently. So you have to look at the society itself and see what are the fissures, what are the things that cause tension. In the US, at the moment, people are talking about liberty, freedom, don't trade on me, my body, my rights, and all of that. And they're all good, but that's when you're looking at the same way we say that countries cannot do anything unless they come together. Individuals too cannot accomplish anything unless they compromise with one another and see from someone else's point of view. Because you can't tell me that it is justified that healthcare workers are suffering. Many of them have died because people cannot do just simple things like wearing a mask or social distancing or avoiding large gatherings. It's difficult to justify, but that's probably the world where the world is at the moment. There's a lot of individualism, and people believe that it is their right, but it's a fine line to tread, and a difficult one as well.
Dr. Ugochukwu, there are so many fine lines to tread during this pandemic, and it has been a worthwhile time spent with you today discussing things from healthcare to legal issues to global politics and all whatnot. So I am so grateful for having you on my invitation today, Dr. Ugochukwu. So at this point, I don't know if you have any closing remarks for us.
It's just to say thank you for what you are doing and the public education that you are delivering. I believe people watch and they learn, they get educated, and they can weigh their own perspectives against some other persons, right? So what you're doing is really worthwhile, and the conditions that we find ourselves. And I wish you the best.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate
You're welcome. Yeah.
it. You have a
You too.